Cybertruck body is going to prison. Yep. And I'm not saying American prison. It may be Nene prison. Now, I'm not going to give any crumbs, right? However, the trigger point is going to be denaturalization because at that point, he is no longer under the protection of supremacy clause under his citizenship, but he reverts back to his South African citizenship. That makes it easier to get him. See, thanks to global coordination, we're coming closer to figuring out the how. And the how was driven and headed by a Cybertruck body. Now, I'm not going to expand on that. However, what I want us to focus on is revisit this. The federal prosecution of election offenses that we did in the attached video in the description. Now, what is election fancy stuff? Election fancy stuff involves a substantive irregularity relating to the Voting Act, such as bribery, note that, intimidation, or forgery, note that, which has the potential to taint the election itself. During the past century and a half, Congress and federal courts have articulated the following constitutional principles concerning the right to vote in the United States. Any activity intended to interfere corruptly with any of the principles indicated below may be accounted as a federal crime. Now note, the fact that technology had not been taken into account as this was being created doesn't mean that it does not apply. All that it has to do is encompass any of the following, and then it doesn't matter how you achieve it, that can be put under scrutiny. One of the integral parts of elections is that all qualified citizens who are eligible to vote can vote. So if Cybertruck did any fancy stuff to interfere with the fact that all eligible citizens are able to vote, such as using technology and fancy stuff to target certain communities and basically virtually throw that away, this would count. This goes very well with number 2. All qualified voters have the right to have their votes counted fairly and honestly. However, if it is not counted fairly and honestly because the technology and software that was used to manipulate and actually reject qualified voters in order to come to a certain outcome, that would be election fraud. This is interesting because here it says invalid ballots dilute the worth of valid ballots and therefore will not be counted. So if tech is the one doing this, then there is a footprint, which means that you can garner the intention of what certain actions were intended to create, right? However, if it is election officials who throw it away, which is how voter suppression actually happens, it's complicated in regards to gaining whether or not that was a wider conspiracy. But with tech, we're capable of doing that. Let's look at number 6 right here. Voting shall not be influenced by bribery or intimidation. Bribery. Do you remember a certain lottery? $1 million a day that a judge actually said that it was not an illegal lottery? Well, if evidence can be garnered that the one who positioned this lottery already had an intended outcome and therefore contributed in doing fancy stuff so that outcome can be produced, and then went ahead and did a lottery to influence people in swing states to actually register, it is a valid question as to whether this would now count as bribery, even if initially it did not, because now there is a connection to a wider conspiracy to position a certain winner, right? And we look at conduct that constitutes federal election fraud. The first one being paying voters for registering to vote or for voting in elections in which a federal candidate is on the ballot. Now, this positions that campaign should not be the one paying voters to register to vote. Because in a way, it's seen as you're buying that campaign, right? But we know through connection that a certain Cybertruck body has a close relationship with a certain candidate. So why was that not flagged? Obviously, we know why. Politicized courts, right? However, that positions that there was a connection to the candidate. Therefore, the intention of doing this lottery was what? To increase in those swing states so that it can benefit the candidate. Obviously, there wasn't a requirement. However, you position a connotation to this individual who is supporting a candidate who is giving out money, and as a result, you favor that candidate. And 2, conspiring to prevent voters from participating in elections in which a federal candidate is on the ballot. Now, this is important because, again, if we prove 1, then wouldn't we prove 2 if there is fancy stuff going on? Because although there is not a lot of litigation hold in regards to election officials throwing out votes, which can be constituted as voter suppression when it comes to tech, that has footprints. So you can very easily garner up data in which a certain action was created that really suppressed the votes of certain demographics versus others, and therefore it becomes much more clear the intention of any such conspiracy, right? And in this reality, the threat to the country is so severe that I would position that, especially considering that Cybertruck got his citizenship through fraud, through lies, hypothetically, because this is a story, this is for entertainment purposes only, this Cybertruck got their status in the United States through lies. And as a result, that means that he can be denaturalized. In that reality, it's much easier to get him. But even more, even if he's not denaturalized, it's easier to get him because I would suggest that this is such a severe breach that the United States would have given pre-authorization or authorization through the military channels in order for there to be foreign action against a U.S. citizen, which is non-traditional, which is not something that they usually do. But this is so significant that I believe he will face justice. And as a result, the win will be dissolved, the entire ticket. What Canada states, the 28th, is going to be really important in regards to what will happen next in this reality, and that is the 28th. I do believe that time is ticking. However, there are things being done in the shadows. It's possible, it's incredibly possible that those findings will contribute directly to changes in the United States. And why? Ask yourself, why would we have to depend on foreign evidence? Compromise. There's a deep compromise in the deep state. And because of that, we have to depend on foreign entities to bring about that trigger of justice before we can. And I believe that if anything occurs, it is pre-authorization from former Joe Biden that will result in justice actually being positioned. And it is reality, the ticket of King Mango and Couch Humper being dissolved and getting Cybertruck body, we get our solution.